stories have phenomenal power to humanize mental health and create the social change we all want to see.
Asha means hope in some ancient languages, and it's the name of the organization this woman created to end the stigma around mental illness.
K2's Genevieve Rayom joins us live in the studio. And Genevieve, the heart of Asha International is storytelling.
Telling stories, that's how Asha International is trying to normalize the conversation around mental health. One example of that, the Let's Talk About Mental Health school program. It's where kids talk to kids, helping them find the light through the darkness.
And it says, I'm fine, one direction. And if you flip it upside down, it says, save me.
Rebecca Miles is talking to a health class at Century High School about her tattoo. Its uniqueness resonates with a lot of people.
Within the week, it went international.
In the summer of 2015, she shared a photo of it on Facebook alongside a poetic profession of pain. She recites it to the class.
And depression is the tears I have because I don't know why I feel so worthless when I know I should feel happy.
With 360,000 shares and counting, many have already read Rebecca's story. You might even remember seeing it here on K2 last spring.
It just captured my mental illness and my depression perfectly.
But with Asha International inside the classroom, her story really isn't about her.
And that's why we're here today. We want to share our stories and put a face to mental health.
It's about shattering the stigma and saving lives.
It was just so debilitating and I didn't know what to do that when I was 13 years old, I tried to kill myself.
The students hear from multiple peers. They provide context on the spectrum of mental illness, from destructive depression and cultural challenges similar to the ones Asha founder Gayatri Ramprasad dealt with.
It's all about the honor in my culture that I had dishonored them publicly by being mentally ill.
To the manic moments of bipolar disorder.
I thought that songs on the radio were talking about me.
They all share their struggles to shine a light on their successes.
It is a lot of work to get to a place of peace, but it is worth it, and you can do it.
To be that beacon of hope.
You're not alone in what you're feeling.
Now, I want to share something with all of you that actually came from that program at Century. One of the health teachers had her students write these handwritten thank you notes following the Asha presentation, and these are not the typical maybe one-liners you might expect from teens. I'll actually read part of this one to you. It says, "Your stories help me because I am suffering from depression myself, and I know if I open up about it, I will be picked on at school because of it. I hope that you guys coming will change people so I can actually open up and get help."
I think a lot of people probably feel that way, and that's why this program is so important.
And I know that's the case because I read through all of these letters. This one actually thanked Asha for the motivation, saying, "I'm on a road to recovery and you play a large part in that." There are more than 90 of these letters. We posted about a dozen of them on K2.com, so you can check out more.
Giving people hope.
Yes.
Exactly.
That's the key to all this. Genevieve, good stuff. Thank you.
And we want to remind you, experts say most mental health crises are temporary. They will pass. If you need to talk to someone, you can always call the National Lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK or text HOME to 741-741. You can even chat live with an expert at suicidepreventionlifeline.org.
Good evening. Everyone has a story. My story, your story, our stories have the power to give hope and change lives. Stories connect us, comfort us, let us know that we're not alone, and give us hope to cope, survive, and thrive. Stories have the power to save lives and create social change. Our story is our superpower. Whether it is in changing attitudes and perceptions about mental illness, or how we treat people with mental health conditions, or advocate for changes in public policies, our stories are our superpower. But disclosing our struggles with mental health conditions can be terrifying, both personally and professionally, because of the consequences. Unfortunately, the stigma surrounding mental health conditions prevents many people from seeking the life-saving treatment and support that they need. At Asha International, we are dedicated to destigmatizing mental illness and promoting mental health and well-being at schools, in workplaces, and in the community through the power of storytelling. Tonight, 10 incredibly courageous storytellers will share their stories of hope and resilience to raise awareness of mental health as an integral part of personal, organizational, and community wellness. Together, we will shine a light on mental health and end stigma, one story at a time. Welcome to each and every one of you. My name is Gayatri Ramprasad. I'm the founder and president of ASHA International. The technology seems to have a mind of its own. Our vision is to create communities of hope, empathy, and inclusion, where every man, woman, and child living with a mental health condition will find the love and support that they need to realize their fullest potential. Since the launch of our programs in 2006, we have had the privilege of reaching out and touching the lives of more than 55,000 people nationally and internationally with a resounding message of hope and well-being. Before we begin, I would like to thank our incredibly generous sponsors. First of all, to start with, thanks to Intel for providing this auditorium to all of us this evening. Thanks to our presenting sponsors, Northwest Women's Clinic, Rainier Springs, and Nike, the Ability Network within Nike. Gold sponsors, Keep Oregon Well, Cascadia Behavioral Healthcare, and Mind Matters. Silver sponsors, Cedar Hills Hospital, the Recovery Village, and Kaiser Permanente. Bronze sponsor, Life Call Center, home to ASHA International as well. Honorable mention, and again, great thanks to NAMI Washington County. And our media sponsor tonight is KATU. Big thanks to KATU and KBOO Community Radio. Thanks to all of them. Thanks to our photographer, Andrea, and our videographer, Kai, and his team for capturing memories that we will certainly savor for years to come. Thanks most of all to each and every one of you for taking time in your busy lives to come join us on this beautiful spring evening in this journey that we will all embark on, a journey of hope, of connection, and of community. Most of all, my thanks to the very brave 10 storytellers tonight, and I'm sure you will agree with me once you hear their stories. It is my distinct pleasure now to introduce ASHA International's newest board member and our MC tonight, Genevieve Rhéaume. Gotcha. Genevieve is an Emmy-nominated reporter for KATU News. She grew up here in Portland, graduated from Jesuit High School, and then traveled to the Midwest for college. She graduated from the University of Missouri, the world's first journalism school, and then came back to the best coast, of course, the West Coast, to start her career in journalism. Welcome, Genevieve. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Again, my name is Genevieve Rhéaume. Thank you especially to Gayatri for inviting me to be a part of this organization. This is actually the first event I've ever emceed, so big thanks to you for entrusting me in this. But Gayatri has really opened the door for a lot of people in this room. She started at ASHA International all by herself and has grown it into this incredible organization that it is now. And it's all thanks to her persistence, her authenticity, and her bravery in talking about a subject that so many people don't want to talk about. I actually met Gayatri while doing interviews for that K2 video. Back in the fall, K2 launched a mental health program focused on youth mental health called Kind is Better. And every Thursday, we air stories about youth mental health during our 6 o'clock newscast, and that was one of them that aired at the start of our program there. With ASHA and K2, our missions are very similar. At K2, we share other people's stories, and with ASHA, we share our own. And that's what tonight is all about. It's all about hope. ASHA means hope in some ancient languages, as you just heard. And in English, it's actually an acronym for a source of hope for all. It's about bravery and courage and proving that talking about mental health, being truly honest about it, can help. It's about shattering the stigma and stereotypes. You're going to hear from students and adults. You'll hear from a yoga teacher. You'll hear from a Nike VP, as well as an attorney, people you might not normally think are battling the very thing that has likely allowed them to be successful, their brains. Tonight is also about change. It's about inspiring you to change the way you think about your own mental health, or maybe that of the person who's sitting right next to you, who you love. We want you to know that your mental health should be a priority. And if you're sitting in this audience and you think I'm talking to you, I am. There is help, there is hope, and you deserve both. For some, though, we know this might be tough for you to hear. I want you to know that there are 3 mental health providers in the audience who have volunteered their time to help you out. So if you have an emotion that you're not quite sure how to deal with after listening to one of these stories, feel free to step out whenever you want to, and a mental health professional will meet you in the lobby out there. We also want you to know we have resources for you after tonight ends. I want everybody right now to take out their phones. Normally, I wouldn't be pleased if I saw people on their phones, but not right now. I'd like everybody here, everybody to take out your phone and take a picture of this screen here. These are ways you can help people who are in a mental health crisis. This is for adults, for veterans, for teens. I want to point out one line specifically, Youth Line, which is a teen-to-teen crisis line where teens can text, chat online, or call someone else, because everyone in this room, whether it's you or the person maybe in front of you in the grocery line, a coworker, a niece, maybe your son, everyone is impacted by mental health, and you can be a resource for them. So take the time after today to look back at these numbers and add them into your contacts so you can be a source of hope for someone else. Now, once you're done taking those pictures, you can put those phones away and silence them. It's time to get started. These storytellers, well, the act of talking in front of a large group might be nerve-wracking. They're not scared to tell their stories because they know their story, just as yours is their superpower. I am honored to welcome our first storyteller, Adam.
I think when we talk about mental health disorders, a lot of the times some things can tend to get lost in translation. When we talk about mental health, we talk about them in broad strokes. We tend to use almost euphemistic languages or ways to distance ourselves. It's easy to talk about symptoms. I can list you the symptoms of depression. But to tell you what it was like for me to experience depression on a day-to-day basis is much different. It's much more intimate. It's much more vulnerable. But that's why I'm here, is to share my story. So what did it look like for me to have depression in my early 20s? Have you ever been so tired that you didn't leave your bed for 3 days except to go to the bathroom? And in that time, you're so depressed that even getting out of bed to go get food is difficult. So you reach across your bed to an open jar of Nutella, and you bring it close, and you don't even have a spoon, so you take a finger and you just scoop it into your mouth. And you do that for 3 days straight. I would find that a lot of the times I would spend hours watching TV and playing games on my phone, ignoring all other responsibilities. Not because it was something that I liked to do. It was because those things provided just enough distraction from myself, from my own mind, that I didn't feel like a prisoner in my own body and a prisoner in my own mind. And so I would sit there and distract myself, because if I didn't, I felt as though I was walking on a tightrope, and that at any moment I could fall, and if I did, I would be swept up into this current, and I would be lost forever, and I would die. It wasn't logical, but I genuinely believed that. And so I would sit there for hours distracting myself. And this presented itself in so many other ways outside of my life. I found that even with friends, I couldn't enjoy hanging out with them. I would smile and I would laugh. But on the inside, I just felt like this hollow husk of a person. Like there was just this deep, abiding sadness that would never leave me. And I felt that for a year. For over a year, I never experienced a single positive emotion. I don't know if you know what that's like, but that is incredibly distressing. But my story doesn't end there. My amazing parents helped me find a psychiatrist. And over a year, I tried 10 different medications, and I finally found a medication that worked. And it was like I was flying above Portland in the clouds, and then all of a sudden you break above the cloud line and you see the sun and you're like, oh, the sun actually does exist. But that was what it was like emotionally. I was able to finally feel a positive emotion. Now, that's not everybody's experience, but it was mine. And so now, I'm a clinical psychology PhD student, and I study depression. And I remember when this happened, this was so intriguing to me because I thought, oh, well, this tells me that if medication was the solution, then mental health must be biologically based, that there must be some simple explanation. If we can just figure out what that is, then we can solve mental health. And that seems so simple. But there's a part of my story that complicates that. I'm gay. And when I was 20, I did not want to be. I was trying everything I could to not be gay. And it wasn't until years later when I was in therapy that I realized how much that contributed to my depression. But here's the thing, that's not unique to me. Gay people are significantly more likely to experience mental health disorders, suicidal ideation, and other health disparities. But even more compelling inside that is when you look at within the gay community and you look at gay people whose family and friends support them versus gay people whose family and friends don't support them, we find that those people are 8 times more likely to experience suicidal ideation and mental health disorders as opposed to those that are accepted. And so this tells me something. This paints a picture that mental health is complex. Mental health isn't simply biology or psychology. It would be nice if it were, but it's not. It's this complex interaction between your environment, your beliefs, and your biology. And so my research has taken on that. I study depression from culture to genes to try to understand how mental health occurs and what happens that brings it about in people. But the issue is that we still don't know so much. And so it's important for us to understand how complex mental health is. And so as you're here listening to these stories, what I want you to do is I want you to hear and take in how varied these experiences are. That there's no single story that's the same. That what worked for me might not work for another person and vice versa. Mental health is complex. And the only way that we'll be able to truly understand it is to get a fuller, better picture of what mental health is. And that's why I'm here sharing my story. And that's why we're here sharing our stories, so that we can provide a window into mental health in the hopes that we can finally support those that are struggling with mental health issues day to day. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. We're now going to welcome Natalie down to the stage, who's going to talk about the generational differences in approaching mental illness and why it isn't always about beating mental health, but maybe just understanding the battle a little better. Come on down.
I have a clear memory of the first time I thought of taking my own life. And even though it scared me, the thought was in my mind, and it felt like it would never go away. The idea that I could stop my own heart or keep myself from breathing with such a small action absolutely terrified me. But at the same time, I was obsessed with the idea of it. I was 14 years old. Of course, these feelings didn't emerge overnight. For as long as I can remember, I have dealt with mental health issues. At 4 years old, I was in occupational therapy to deal with my high sensitivity to new sounds, tastes, textures, and environments. It wasn't until I was 6 or 7 when I was officially diagnosed with OCD and anxiety. And now I've been in one type of therapy or another for nearly 10 years. Most people have heard of OCD, and it's often joked about when people are really tidy, but there's so much more to it than having a compulsion to wash your hands 10 times before eating a meal. For some people, this may be the case, but for me personally, it's a little bit different. I worry my brain is going to make me do stupid or violent things, like start screaming in the middle of the hallway at school or walk right into the middle of traffic. But it's not just in my head. I often have to redo whole sections of my notes, or even multiple pages if I don't like the way they look. It's time-consuming, but it's a compulsion, and that's why I do it. I also trace things. When the teacher is writing something on the whiteboard or I see something across the room, I will trace it with my finger, in midair, or in my legs. I don't know why I do it, but I do it anyway. The hardest time of my life was in middle school. I had lots of great friends, but there were a few girls who didn't treat me very nicely. In fact, I was bullied by some of these girls. This took a toll on my self-esteem, and by the time I was 13, I started showing symptoms of depression. I had been seeing my current therapist for a few years, and she immediately started helping me cope with it. Sadly, I became more depressed, and it really started to interfere with my daily life. It got to the point where I couldn't go to school or after school activities because of my anxiety, and staying home so much only made my depression worse. It even led me down a path I never thought possible. I started to have thoughts of suicide, feeling like all my friends had forgotten about me and that I had no purpose in this world. I felt empty, and sometimes it felt like my world was spinning out of control. This feeling started to lessen when school got out, and eventually, with a combination of medication and therapy, I started to climb out of that depression. But my constant companion, anxiety, never left my side. I was nervous about high school approaching and worried that I wasn't going to get better by the time high school started. During that summer, I was a counselor at a day camp, a summer activity I always look forward to. But on the 4th day of camp, I was too anxious to go. So I grabbed some scissors and started making scratches on my arms while my dad waited for me in the car. My parents got me in with my therapist right away, and I remember the exact words she used to turn my life around. If you had cut any deeper, you could have hit a vein and died. At this moment, there was nothing I wanted to do more than to get better. And I did. I finally started using my coping skills. My doctor tweaked my medication, and I started attending weekly group therapy sessions with other teenage girls suffering from mental health issues. And still, most people would have no idea what I've been through. From the outside, I look like every other kid. I hang out with my friends, I read books, I go to movies and listen to music. I'm involved in school activities like track and leadership. I have an opinion on the Chris War. It's Hemsworth, obviously. I do all those things while continuing to fight daily anxiety and occasional bouts of depression. I'm fortunate that I'm now better at using my coping skills when I'm feeling more anxious or depressed, and can usually get myself feeling grounded again. Deep breathing is my go-to skill, and reading, writing, and listening to music also work well for me. It wasn't until more recently that I realized how great of a coping skill physical activity is. Since I've started participating in high school track and field, Running and being around my friends has improved my self-esteem, mental and physical health. Now when I have a bad day at school, I have track practice to help me relax. I've learned that none of this has destroyed me or my desire to live my life to the fullest. And while I know I may never beat anxiety and depression, I'm equally confident that I won't let it beat me. It was only recently that I became interested in educating others about mental health, but I've gained so much knowledge about how important it is. If we don't talk about it, we're just feeding the never-ending cycle of silence and isolation. Talking about mental health is still a taboo among many parts of society, and far too many people don't seek the help they need. My grandmother is one of those people. She is currently recovering from severe anxiety and depression, still feeling shameful about her diagnosis. Unlike my generation, where mental health is talked about more openly, my grandmother grew up without the same support and resources available to help her cope. And it's not just my grandmother. Mental health issues and alcoholism are scattered throughout my family tree over many generations. But they didn't speak about their troubles. They certainly didn't stand up in front of a room of total strangers and share their most vulnerable thoughts. Oh my gosh. Sorry. I want to break that cycle. I know I'm not the only teen who suffers from mental illness. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, 1 in 5, or 15 million, American children and young adults struggle with mental illness or a learning disorder. And suicide is the second leading cause of death among this age group. That tells us that mental illness is no small issue. Luckily, organizations like ASHA and people like us give me hope that those of us suffering from mental illness will find strength and comfort from society rather than fear and isolation. If you or someone you know is currently struggling with mental health issues, I urge you to get help or be part of the support system for that person. When we work together, even the smallest actions can make the biggest differences in changing how society views mental health. Thank you for letting me share my story.
Thank you for that courageous story. I would now like to welcome John down to the stage. He's going to talk about shattering the stigma about mental illness and why mental health does not have to be a barrier to workplace success.
The first time I shared my story publicly, I started by saying that I'm probably not the face that you would typically put on mental illness. And someone kindly pointed out to me that I was really just stating my own biases, because I'm not the face that I expect to see up here. I don't fit the stereotypes that I've held for someone with a mental health condition, because my life is great. And it's pretty much always been good. Like Natalie, I went to Sunset High School. I went to Westmont College, I graduated from USC Law School, and I had a job waiting for me at one of the largest law firms in the world. I worked in their Los Angeles office. A while later, I moved back home. Now I'm a co-owner of a law firm. I've got an amazing wife, and we have a spectacular and hilarious almost 2-year-old daughter. So things are good. And I've never had a rock bottom moment. So because of this, I've had the luxury of hiding my mental health issues if I want to. But I think for too long, too many people who have been standing in my shoes have chosen to hide these things. And I want to change that. 10 years ago, I flew all the time for work. And when I was in the air, I would sometimes dream about my plane crashing in the wilderness because I wanted to be Tom Hanks in Castaway. As I'd fly back into LA at night, I'd see the city lights, and my heart would sink because my life was still there waiting for me. See, I was successful, but I was miserable, and I couldn't figure out what was my stressful job and what was maybe something inside of me. But I was ready to quit, and I wanted to go live on a friend's couch in Washington, D.C. That was probably my most realistic escape fantasy. I told a friend about it, and she suggested maybe I should talk to a therapist before throwing my career away. I'm really glad she did. In my first session with Dr. Greenberg, she said that she preferred using therapy over a combination of therapy and medication. And I was like, Okay. I think maybe some people, when they go to therapy, they have a self-diagnosis in mind. And maybe they know what medication they want. But I didn't. Until that day, it had never crossed my mind that I might have a diagnosable condition. Well, it turns out I'm the exception for Dr. Greenberg because she immediately sent me to a psychiatrist for medication. I think what did it is when I told her that on my drive to work in the morning on the 10 freeway, I'd dream about crashing my car into the median so that I could get to go to the hospital. Now, I was never suicidal, and I really never wanted to die. I really didn't want to hurt my brain, but I thought maybe breaking a leg would get me a break from work for a few weeks. I learned then that I suffer from generalized anxiety disorder. And at first that diagnosis didn't sit well with me because I'm naturally pretty stoic and optimistic. I'm calm, I'm even-keeled, and nothing phases me. Meanwhile, though, on the inside, sometimes I'm in turmoil. And I waited way too long to address my anxiety and that conflict, and I believe that's what led to my second diagnosis, which is dysthymia. Dysthymia is a form of low-level depression where it doesn't have the really low lows, but it also doesn't cycle in and out, and so you don't ever have a good moment, and what it meant is I was basically bummed out for a decade. To treat my anxiety and depression, my psychiatrist gave me Prozac, and then he gave me Klonopin for the days when the anxiety was really bad. A few weeks after starting treatment, I was flying back into LA at night again, and I saw the city lights. I felt good. It was such a small moment, but I was excited to be home, and that's when I knew I was going to be okay. I continued with treatment and medication for 2 years, and at the end of that, the depression was gone completely, and it's never come back. But the anxiety is trickier. It's a lot stickier. I remember experiencing anxiety as early as 6 years old. My first grade teacher, Mrs. Nagel, was a wonderful teacher, and she held us to a very high standard, and I was terrified of disappointing her. So if I didn't fall asleep at precisely 8:30, I would start crying because I was afraid that if I went to sleep late, then I'd wake up late, and if I woke up late, then I'd get to school late, and if I got to school late, then Mrs. Nagel would be mad at me. And that's always been the core of my anxiety. My body freaks out if I think there's a chance that I might disappoint somebody. And yet I also feel like it's my responsibility to not let anyone be disappointed ever. So there's kind of an issue. Today my anxiety still manifests physically. I get headaches. I clench my teeth. I stiffen my neck. I get tightness in my chest. I can actually feel my blood pressure going up when the anxiety grips me. I'll wake up in the middle of the night with my heart pounding and thoughts just spinning through my mind. And as soon as I deal with one, another one just pops up to take its place. And it feels out of control. And sometimes the anxiety is tied to real life stressors and work. I still have a stressful job. But other times it's not. Even when everything's smooth, my body will still find things to be anxious about because that's how generalized anxiety goes. If we have plans out of the house on a Sunday night, my wife and I will start to get anxious because I feel like I'm not going to be prepared or ready for work on Monday morning. In a funny way, I'm still afraid of being late to school. When we share these stories, people will often say that we're brave. And I appreciate that. I really do. Because it is really, really scary for all of us to stand up here and share these things. Sometimes when people tell me that I'm brave, they also admit that they don't think they could ever share these things publicly. And I get that. If we think we're an outcast or alone or different, it would be really hard. But that's not the case. These stories tonight, our stories, are incredibly common. There's nothing special about my story. I'm not unique at all, especially among attorneys. Fully 1/3 of attorneys will self-identify as struggling with anxiety, depression, or substance abuse in an anonymous survey. So that's 3 times the rate of the general public. And I have a feeling if we found out the true rate of attorneys who are suffering, it'd actually be much higher. I don't think I'm the exception. I think I'm actually the norm. And anxious attorneys are actually really good attorneys, as it turns out. The best lawyers I know are anxious. I've had law firm partners tell me that they look for young, anxious attorneys because they work the hardest and they never drop the ball. Being a lawyer is about identifying and addressing the worst case scenarios. So having a lawyer who's a natural worrier kind of makes sense. And yet, even in the legal field, the stigma around anxiety and depression persists because we don't have enough good examples. We don't have enough success stories. And so there's something all of us tonight and all of you can help with. If things are going okay for you and you've ever had anxiety, if your life is going well and you've ever suffered from depression or been stressed out, if you look good on paper and things are okay, and you have the luxury of getting to hide your mental health issue, please don't. If we're all willing to share our struggles, then everyone will know this truth. We can have mental health conditions and be successful. We can have mental health issues and be happy. I am. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Well, I have a question for everybody here. Who here has ever been stressed out? Raise your hand. All right. And put your hand, no, keep them up, keep them up. And put them down if you think you've always handled that stress well. Yeah, I don't think anybody's hand went down, and that's exactly why. Paul's story is about stress and about climbing a mountain and overcoming it. Welcome, Paul.
See if this works. So a week before my 34th birthday, I had a heart attack. Thankfully, it was minor, especially since I refused to go to the ER until the following day. So at this point, two questions probably come to mind. The first is, wait, what did he say? And the second is, who even does that anyway? This guy. I didn't want to admit anything was wrong. I didn't want to take time out of my really demanding work schedule to be told bad news, or worse, waste my time. I was in denial, depressed, a little scared, and as I later learned, clinically anxious. But to help understand how I got there, and ultimately how I got here, I think it's important to understand where I started. I grew up in a small farm town in northern Indiana. I was a country kid, a nature lover, stereotypical sports boy, and an introvert. One of those work hard, eat your meat and veggies, aw shucks types of places. And because of that upbringing, a big part of my identity has always been rooted in my work ethic and my capacity for working long hours, and we're talking seriously long hours. When I decided to practice landscape architecture, that work ethic kicked into high gear. Design professions can be brutally demanding. We're trained to work long hours in the design studio, striving for perfection, proving ourselves worthy by working all night and forsaking relationships with anyone who's not in the studio with us. There was this romantic notion that you've got to suffer for your art and your living. And to this Midwestern kid, all of it made perfect sense. Work hard, show you care, get praise, rinse and repeat. As I grew in the profession, this demand for excellence only grew stronger. And that model continued to make sense to me for a really long time, until it didn't. Back in 2015, I was in an unhealthy place. The year prior, I got divorced, ending a 15-year relationship. And on Christmas Eve, my oldest friend and closest friend of over 30 years died in a car accident. I poured myself into my work thinking that the creativity and the drive to succeed would sustain me. Some colleagues even reinforced it was a correct approach. Just focus on work, you'll get through it, they said. It's natural. Hey, can you work this weekend? Oh, come on, we know you can do it. Turns out I couldn't do it anymore. Instead, I had a blip on an EKG that confirmed I had a minor heart attack. I've since learned that depression increases the risk of adverse cardiac events in people without known heart disease. So the warning signs were there, I just didn't see them. I was completely overcome by the stress from both life and work, and I didn't know how to manage it. On top of that, my self-image as someone who could be depended on under every circumstance, no matter how difficult, started to unravel. And mentors stopped advocating for me when I became less valuable in their eyes, and at that point I felt too weak to be an advocate for myself. I took a week off of work. I was depressed, I felt hopeless, I felt completely worthless, and I felt just done. My inclination was to withdraw from the general public and spend my days alone in my apartment. But after some strong encouragement to get outside and exercise, I decided to go for a bike ride. I hadn't really ridden in years, and the first few miles were slow and painful. And let's just be honest, the whole ride was slow and painful. I've been active and athletic my entire life, and it was embarrassing how unhealthy I had become. But I stuck with it for that entire week, forcing myself to go outside daily and slowly added miles. But even as I was depressed about so many things in my life, with fitness somewhere in the middle of that list, I noticed something positive. Cycling was helping me to decompress, clear my mind, and manage my depression. I kept at it, and as an added bonus, my physical health rapidly improved in a matter of months. Like when I first learned to ride as a child, I was hooked by the beauty and freedom of cycling. Fast forward to 2017. In a healthier place, both physically and mentally, I woke up one morning having literally dreamt of a community where all are welcome to celebrate cycling and everything that makes it great. The big idea was a group of individuals looking for their people, a place where they could belong and find the support to push themselves. From that initial dream, my apparel company, Roulé Cycling, was born. At Roulé, we believe that the strongest bonds are built through diversity, empathy, and the support of community. To live out those values, I also created the Club Roulé, a cycling community based in Portland. The Club Roulé is multi-layered, including partners who have embraced the club's mission and lend their support in multiple ways. And cyclists in the Club Roulé are a diverse group who embrace empathy and have created a kind and inclusive culture where all are welcome. This community has been instrumental in my own ongoing healing process. Research has demonstrated a correlation between anxiety, depression, and heart disease, as well as a relationship between physical health, mental health, and social connectedness. Part of what I hope you take from my story today is that we can grow beyond our training and our environment. We can all get better about accepting ourselves and each other for who we are, seeking out the support we need, and doing what is necessary to live healthy lives. It's easy to forget there are many approaches for managing depression and anxiety. Two of the more common methods, medication and one-on-one counseling, work for a lot of people, but they didn't work for me, and that's okay. We're all different, and just because one method works for some person doesn't mean it will for you too. Keep trying until you find something that works. While my something was physical activity, the single biggest factor in helping me fight depression on a day-to-day basis is the support of community. I'd like to leave you with 4 takeaways. 1, find a community to participate in, and in that community, find a way to support others. Helping other people can help you. While I often love the solitude of riding alone, these days when I'm riding alone, I often wonder what other members of the club are doing. Is anybody out riding? Are they doing it together? Maybe I'll run into them out here. That community means the world to me. 2, extend grace and acceptance to each other and especially to yourself. Nobody's perfect, and your value is not tied to how long you can suffer alone. 3, be aware of the signs that something isn't quite right, and learn the difference between little bumps in the road and crisis. And finally, 4, trust and respect feelings. They are so valuable. Sharing our feelings and stories, oh, that was advantageous. Sharing our feelings and stories leads to empathy. It helps each of us understand that we are not the first to experience whatever we're going through. My hope is that telling my story will encourage and empower you to share yours. Empathy brings us closer together. Greg LeMond is considered by many the greatest American cyclist of all time. And one of his most famous cycling quotes is, "It never gets easier, you just go faster." There are no shortcuts. There is no such thing as perfection. Find that supportive community that will push with you. And remember that life never gets easier, we just get better at it. Let's roll together. Thank you.
Keep climbing that mountain, Paul. Thank you. Next is Molly. You might recognize her from the K2 video. Her story is actually about overcoming humiliation, understanding her diagnosis, and proving that your past does not have to define your future.
When I look back on my childhood growing up in Portland, I have fond memories. Playing capture the flag, going on annual camping trips and beach trips, having neighborhood block parties, and playing different seasonal sports. For the most part, I was a happy kid with no significant signs of anything concerning. The time finally came for me to graduate 8th grade from a small school I had been attending since kindergarten. As it is for most 8th graders, the thought of high school was intimidating, but it was especially for me because I was going to attend Grant High School, a public school. With no friends from grade school attending this high school with me, I was desperate to make friends as soon as possible. Me being a typical high schooler, I wanted to be cool and popular. The need to be cool and popular took me down a road I never thought I would go. I considered myself an intelligent, well-rounded girl who would never get into anything too dangerous or stupid. The group of friends I surrounded myself with were curious teens who wanted to experiment. I will take responsibility for myself because I was curious too. What started out as innocent, occasional pot smoking and drinking grew into much more over the course of my high school career. By sophomore year, I was smoking pot at least once a day, drinking every weekend, and eventually started using hard drugs like cocaine, ecstasy, acid, and mushrooms. I had made all the friends I had ever wanted, and over time I was known as the party girl. However, the pain and suffering that was going on inside of my mind and body was unexplainable. I became severely depressed and anxious, suffering from panic attacks and hypochondria. It was hard to be in public, let alone be at school. These panic attacks were so horrific, I thought at any moment I would have a heart attack. To try to put into words what my anxiety felt like and still at times feels like, including feeling unable to breathe, feeling a tightness and pressure in my throat as if it was closing, feeling a weight on my chest and a gut-wrenching, shooting pain throughout my stomach. My depression included sleeping more hours than hours awake because I didn't have to feel as much when I was asleep. Isolating myself from others, feeling worthless, hopeless, and insecure, and an inability to truly feel pleasure, laughter, or joy. My coping skills became the substances I once innocently used. The relationship with my parents was non-existent. I was disrespectful in every way you could imagine. Therapy and medication was a routine I grew used to, but it never seemed to lift me from the hole I had buried myself alive in. In a recent article I read from the New York Times, it dives into the shocking statistics of suicide, mental health, and drug abuse in teenagers today. 1 in 7 high school students reported misusing drugs. What I dealt with in high school is still very prevalent today. There's strong data to show that family support and attention by parents to what their teens are doing can make a huge difference in an adolescent's life. Communities can support access to mental health and substance use services, and schools can offer coping skills and bystander intervention training. I barely made it through high school. My senior year was coming to an end, and I was crossing my fingers I would graduate. It was May 27th. My mom, my brother, and I were driving home from school when my mom received a phone call. My dad was in the hospital. He had a heart attack. That very same day, my dad passed away. My life didn't feel real. I'd been suffering so much with my mental health that this was too much for my brain to even process. The years following my dad's death were dark. The grieving was hard to process through with all the drinking and using I continued to do. But I didn't want to feel anything. I wanted to self-medicate the way I always had before. I was living at my mom's house, unable to hold down a job, sleeping all day and drinking all night. I remember one day my mom brought me a free yoga pass and encouraged me to go. With anxiety in my chest, I mustered up the courage. After leaving the class, I couldn't remember the last time I had felt so good. My breathing was deep. My body felt so light and free. Although it was fleeting, it was nice. I'd like to say that I kept going back, but I didn't. Maybe I didn't feel I deserved to feel good. Maybe it was such an unfamiliar feeling that it seemed wrong. As years passed, I lost touch with a lot of friends from high school, which was a blessing in disguise because I didn't have as many people to use with. This started me on a healthier path since I wasn't able to constantly check out with drugs and alcohol. I had more time to heal and make healthier choices. At 22, I finally got a job and I moved out on my own. I was so proud of myself. But as I've learned, over time, life can throw you curveballs. And it is how you perceive and react to these curveballs that determine your outcome. During this time, I had been drinking a diet tea product. I'd been drinking it for about a week. I had so much energy, I was able to multitask, and I was hyper aware of my surroundings. I loved to sing, and I was feeling extra confident, so I posted a video on Facebook of me singing. The next morning, I thought the video went viral. When I went out and about, I thought people were recognizing me all over the city. I was so excited. I thought I'd been discovered, and my dream had come true. These thoughts quickly started spiraling out of control. My family became very worried by my behavior, and later would find out I was having a full-blown manic episode. I was running around all over the city, absolutely delusional. I was acting just like the people you see, homeless on the street. In my own world, talking to myself, acting irrational, and I had no control over what was happening to me. I was finally hospitalized, 3 times to be exact. Before I was stabilized, and I was finally diagnosed with bipolar disorder. After being hospitalized, I went to outpatient treatment for 6 months, where I was properly medicated and educated about my disorder. Shame, guilt, and sadness consumed me. I had people I had known for a long time stop talking to me. Although what happened to me was out of my control, I felt like I was being punished. Most of the people in my life, including myself, were uneducated about bipolar disorder and didn't know how to help me. It has been a long road from then until now. With support, medication, education, diet, exercise, hobbies, meditation, and a whole lot of self-love. I'm proud to say I'm a certified yoga instructor. I released my first single through a record label, and I'm going to school in winter for health and nutrition. I chose to go through yoga teacher training to enlighten myself. I wanted another tool I could add to my recovery. As an instructor, I want to bring a sense of peace and calm through the poses and breathing exercises. I also want to help others who are struggling with their mental health, much like I was. After a few years passed from my diagnosis, I started feeling the need to tell my story and bring awareness to the community about mental health. I found Asha through a woman I heard speak at a charity event who is also a storyteller. After I joined Asha, I've started to share my story at local high schools and have felt such a sense of peace and empowerment through sharing my story. When for so long I felt shame, guilt, and sadness. I've had multiple young teens come up and confide in me after hearing my story. They feel courageous enough to open up about their struggle after I did. I'm able to give them advice and hope, which is so important and rewarding. Humans can adapt and recover. It takes time and effort to find out what works best for you, but you can do it. With all of these tools and coping skills I have learned, I am proud to say I haven't had a manic episode since my first one, almost 6 years ago. And I plan to keep it that way. Struggling with your mental health does not mean you cannot recover and live a full life. I'm here to tell you, you can. I'm proud to be a part of Asha to bring hope and resilience to others and to end the stigma around mental illness. Does my story make you uncomfortable? Good, because there has never been any positive change without people feeling a little uncomfortable. Thank you.
Thank you, Molly. I actually had the privilege of introducing our next speaker to Asha. I did a story with him through Kind is Better. His name is Austin. I'd like to welcome him down here to the stage. And he's going to talk about his transparent experience with the military and how one person has the power to save a life.
Growing up, I heard many stories from my great-grandfather about his experience in the Army Air Corps right after World War II. More recently, I talked with my uncle who served in the Air Force when I was visiting Minnesota in 2018. So naturally, I grew up in a family that was very grateful for this beautiful country and obviously the men and women who enlist. I decided when I was 13 years old that I would enlist in the Air Force. My choice of branch changed my senior year of high school when I was talking with a couple of my friends. And I went to go talk to my mom about it, and she handled it the same way as any other mother would. She wouldn't talk to me. So I kind of sat there that night and I thought about it, and I did the rebellious thing, and I still went Marine Corps. I survived a small town high school graduating class of about 68. So I figured I could survive anything. I went to boot camp September of 2014, just 3 months after graduating high school. That wasn't too bad of a big deal. I mean, it's not like Full Metal Jacket status. After boot camp, I went to my MOS schooling in Pensacola, Florida, where I would meet friends I still have to this day. But I lost a lot of friends when I came out saying that I was mentally unhealthy. Brotherhood is one of the main factors why I'm grateful to serve my country and why I served. But the theme of brotherhood is almost a facade when you come out and say, you know, hey, I'm not feeling all right in the head or stuff like that. But before I delve too much into my story, I'm just going to preface it with the armed forces, every chain of command is different. This isn't going to be every story. So at the school, or after the school in Pensacola, well, while I was attending, I had a friend pass away. He was on recruiter's assistant, so he was back home. And he passed in a car accident. There wasn't, anything I could do. I didn't have any coping skills, and unfortunately, that was the second fatality that I would be shown to, I guess, while being in the military or prior. 2013, I lost a friend sophomore year, but I couldn't hang up too much on it because I still had, high school to go through. I had to enlist and all this, so I couldn't really, I had to do it for him. So it was more like a motivation too. Now, with Kyle's passing, I didn't have any coping skills. I didn't have anybody to talk to. I didn't really have any motivation to help me through that. And there's a toxic trait in a lot of chain of commands that if you didn't deploy or go overseas or you didn't have this much time in service, you don't rate to talk to a counselor. You don't deserve it. Your mental health issues are basically devalued. So I just held down all of those emotions and everything until I got to my second schooling in Camp Pendleton. That's when everything kind of resurfaced, and I had a plan to end it all, unfortunately. But before that, I would talk to one of my NCOs who was from where some of my cousins are from, so it was kind of like talking to a cousin about it. And so I talked with him, and I kind of sat him down, and I was like, hey, I'm not feeling too good. And he goes, oh, just go to medical. I was like, this isn't a physical thing there, Sergeant. I feel like taking my own life. And he kind of looks at me, and he goes, okay, we'll get you help. And that was my first experience of changing the mindset of we as a brotherhood to me. Like, I need to get myself help or else I'm gonna let my brothers down. Along the path of seeking help, I felt constantly judged wherever I went, whether it was walking around the barracks or going to my medical appointments. But one thing I always reminded myself, it was a saying that the same NCO that I talked to before, he told me when I was getting checked into the hospital in San Diego. He said, it takes a very strong person to admit something's wrong. Little did I know at the time that he once struggled with mental illness and addiction to alcohol. He's still one of my role models whenever I feel down about getting treatment. 2018, those feelings resurfaced, and they were more strong than ever. I was about an hour away from driving to my designated spot and ending it all. I sent out a tweet prior to coming home that night saying, I need somebody to talk to. Luckily, one of my closest friends saw it, and she told my parents that I needed help. The past year and couple months have been filled with constant reminders that people care about me and are willing to help me understand and take care of my mental health. To this day, I still struggle with all that is ill within my head. I was later diagnosed with major depressive disorder, general anxiety, non-combat PTS, and more recently, bipolar. These illnesses affect my daily life. It's hard for me to find a job I can trust. My most recent job, working with a major computer company, I was terminated legally because I was in a hospital in Kirkland, Washington, and I wasn't available for work, so they terminated my contract. That kind of sucked. It's not easy adjusting to civilian life, even just being briefly in for about a year and a month and 28 days. And it's not easy for people who have been in longer than I have. Same with admitting you need help. Although the statistic used to be 22 veterans and their life daily, we've reduced that number to about 20, which I'm thankful for that we've saved 2 more veteran lives a day, but it's still a big number that we should not have. Hopefully, I'll live to see the day that it's 0 veterans a day. The truth is, we're not weak for seeking help, and being vulnerable. Being vulnerable gives us strength through love and camaraderie. As the old saying goes, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Take, for example, if I was in a physical injury, or if I had a physical injury, I'd seek help immediately, even if it was life-threatening or non-life-threatening. So why not encourage one another to seek help when we're thinking about harming ourselves? Why are we treating mental illnesses more differently than physical ones? When we become vulnerable and open to our emotions, it allows us to be more knowledgeable to our emotions and help us understand other people's emotions, allowing us to help other people who are struggling with mental health issues as well. Instead of judging one person's erratic behavior, you can come to reason that they might not be in the best place mentally right now, and maybe their treatment isn't working for them. I urge everyone to reach out to your friends, veteran or non-veteran, and see how they're doing. Every other day, every day, just make sure you maintain that constant contact. If they're having a bad day, make sure they're okay and they're not going to hurt themselves or each other or just a complete stranger. But if you have that probable cause that you don't trust them being alone, tell somebody you trust, take them to the appointments or take them to the institution, because you don't want to live with the regret of, I could have saved this person's life. Thank you.
Thank you, Austin. I want to now welcome Lily, someone who's battled mental illness for years. Her story is about persistence, hope, and holding on.
Ooh, it's bright. Good evening. I've been living in the Pacific Northwest for 26 years. I flew out from upstate New York to Portland State University to attend a master's in social work program. I now work as a licensed clinical social worker in my private practice that I've had for 11 years. I'm here today on behalf of all of us who put on a brave face, but inside feel broken, profoundly depressed, and potentially like a fraud. I want to share a part of my story to encourage honesty, inspire healing, and to bring hope. I want to just be me, genuine and real, with the hope of helping you be honest with yourself and consider starting a healing journey too. I hope this small sharing will ignite your interest in raising the standard of mental health care in families, communities, and the workforce. I want to encourage us all to abolish stigma associated with the invisible injury we call depression, so that we can step out of the darkness and live with great intention. My slow descent into depression started at the age of 5 after witnessing my dad cry for the first time in response to his father, my grandfather, passing. I began to question existence, which led to big thoughts for a small girl. With no one to talk to or share those confusing thoughts and questions, I kept it all within. As I grew, I experienced other confusing moments, including molestation by both boys and girls, incest, racism, sexism, and understanding that I was adopted and therefore somehow different. I carried all of these questions and experiences within and began to answer my questions with, "It's because you're worthless. You don't matter, and you have no purpose." In spite of the many internal challenges I faced growing up, I became a top athlete, kept good grades, worked 2 jobs, and then graduated from college. I got married, had 2 boys, completed a graduate program, and worked successfully throughout. On the outside, I appeared happy, confident, successful, accomplished. But on the inside, I was broken, debilitated, self-loathing, and thought of a million ways to end my life here on earth. In 2008, something amazing happened. After I had my 5th and final suicide attempt, I entered into counseling with a woman who helped me to change my life forever. I no longer live with depression or suicide on a daily basis. For me, the treatment modality EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing, worked beautifully. EMDR is stimulating the left and the right brain as you process through trauma thoughts, feelings, and images. I remember the first session and walking away baffled as to why it seemed to work and questioning the process. After the second session, I didn't care. I could not believe that I was already starting to feel a lifting from the fog. I distinctly remember bouncing into the therapist's office one day, telling her I thought I was manic. In her very calm manner, she asked me why I thought so. As I started to list all the activities of my day and thoughts, she asked me one simple question. Lily, have you ever been just happy? Wow, so this is what basic, genuine, simple happiness was? I had no idea. Having been so profoundly depressed, I never truly learned what happiness felt like, looked like, or sounded like. This was a radical turning point in my healing journey, one that led to another profound moment in my work with her. Having a clearer mind, now understanding that I can learn new feelings, experience new thoughts, be free from depression, and adopt a new story, I decided to become a therapist and open up private practice. When I presented the idea to my therapist, I expected her to tell me I was too broken or ill-equipped to do such a thing. Instead, without hesitation, she gave me her full support. This crucial moment helped me realize that our difficult pasts, traumas, sufferings, and negative thoughts do not define us. We can become who we desire to be, and there is always hope in becoming whole again. My charge today is to ask you to be honest with yourself. What is really happening in your thoughts? How do you feel about you? Do you like yourself? Do you appreciate who you are? Or are you putting on a mask every day? Are you trying to please others or be someone you're not? Are you too afraid to let someone know you're hurting inside or that you sometimes think about ending your life? Are you carrying guilt for things you have done or shame for what has been done to you? Are you hiding, afraid to discover who you are, concerned about what others might think if only they knew? We need to not only get honest with ourselves, but ask better questions to uncover and invite those suffering to safely share what is truly happening inside. We need to return to the human connection and step away from our computers and phones. We need to be inclusive, not exclusive. We need to be curious about how people manage and what matters to them, not just ask the question why. And we need to remember that humans can change at any age and at any point in their life. It's important to take inventory of our own thoughts and feelings too, acknowledging what we may be concealing or hiding, and allowing ourselves the opportunity to journey towards healing, mental wellness, and becoming whole. When we intentionally meet with others face-to-face or spend intentional time with ourselves, we give opportunity for real connection to take place. We give that person and ourselves an opportunity to be seen, valued, heard, and supported. When we ask how and what instead of why, it provides an opportunity to share from the heart. When we feel valued, not judged, heard, supported, and truly seen, our ability to blossom and become is significantly increased, allowing what has been hidden to come into the light. When what is hidden comes into the light, it can be understood and can lead to healing. I want to encourage you to take time and pay attention to yourself. Are you being honest, valuing yourself, withholding judgment, and nourishing yourself with positive and kind thoughts? And I want you to think about your commitment to providing uninterrupted face-to-face time with others. Do you provide them an honest listening ear? Do you use language and responses that help them know they are valued? Do you ask questions that help them feel that they matter and what they have to say is important? Do you withhold judgments? And do you honor each role you play in life in a way that connects to your values? These are essential questions we need to ask to best determine what is needed to encourage and enhance the well-being of ourselves, our families, communities, work settings, and the everyday world around us. Will you dedicate yourself to being intentional in your everyday actions and words so that you are connecting with yourself and others in a healing way? Will you be brave and assess your daily thoughts and interactions so that you are making human connections, not allowing others to skate by unnoticed? Will you devote yourself to being honest and starting a healing journey? The best way to make the invisible seen is to speak up, reach out, share the truth, and commit to not journeying alone. The time for change, connectedness, growth, and mental wellness is now. Thank you.
Thank you, Lily. Erin will now talk about the cultural differences of mental health and how sometimes having the most uncomfortable conversation is truly the most important.
Can everyone hear me? Okay. Why continue to go to therapy if you just keep acting up? My parents yelled to my sister. You're just wasting our money. She nodded and stopped going to therapy. She never went back. 6 years later, her suicidal thoughts did not subside. She no longer talks about the status of her mental health. She still suffers from both anxiety and depression. However, I now suffer from anxiety and depression too. Growing up, I thought I was emotionally healthy, especially when coming from a large family from both my mother's and father's side. Family gatherings were lively, music blasting in the house, laughter filling the empty spaces in the room, distant relatives, even ones I've never met before, joining in via phone calls or video chats, always inquiring about what's new. But when looking back, I realized that we tend to shy away from the important topics. Mental health was not discussed at my house. The reasons, similar to most people of color, were cultural. As a family who derived from the Philippines, a third world country, my parents believed that only the strong would survive. Those who were weak, or rather those with a mental illness, either wouldn't make it or were seen as disposable anyways. To my parents, depression and anxiety were only something that those who were privileged could get. In other words, this meant only the wealthy, the people that don't know a thing about struggle, could afford to worry about. I found that immigrants learned to find the discomfort or comfort within the discomfort and sadness that comes from the intergenerational trauma within our lineage. It becomes a background noise that encompasses the majority of our lives, while many even succumb to it in silence. But I guess you could say that the emotional pain and lived experience is the cost for immigrants pay in search for a better life. Coming from a family who sacrificed so much to be here, I never questioned it. This is why when my sister was the first one in my life who was brave enough to speak up about mental health in my family, I realized that this subject was taboo. She sought out help from my family in order to seek refuge from the darkness. In turn, they had shamed her. From then on, as the only other child my parent had, I knew that I had to be the normal one. This meant I had to always have a smile plastered in front of my face for my parents. This correlated with a 2011 study that showed that Asian Americans typically avoid mental health services because opting to utilize such services meant admitting the existence of mental health, and that may cause shame to the family if personal issues become public. This spoke volumes to me as I was bottling up my deteriorating mental health like a hushed secret for the last decade. I thought that if anyone knew, but most importantly, if my parents knew, I would be branded like a scarlet letter like Hester Prynne, for depression and anxiety were things I was taught to be ashamed of. My depression began in my early teenage years. I didn't think it was a problem. I assumed feeling low, isolating myself for long periods of time, and the inability to communicate was normal. As young as 13, I suffered from both panic and anxiety attacks. A few of my friends knew, but I rarely ever mentioned it, and never to my family. According to NCBI, Filipino Americans are the second largest immigrant population and Asian ethnic group in the U.S. health disparities for youth behavioral health problems. This truth extends out to any Pacific Islander, Asian, and Asian Americans. If you ask especially women, they will tell you about the pressures of growing up in many Asian households. The high expectations, maintaining that picture-perfect facade, the toxic model minority bullshit that engulfs the rest of our lives as a way to flatten out our experiences in order to conceal our struggles and cap our successes. There is a standard expected of us from birth of being able to stand out for the right reasons, meaning good grades, a fancy career, a high salary, good social standing, and a shelf full of achievements. In my family's minds, having a mental illness can prevent you from achieving those things. And if you're not achieving everything, then why are you even here? So when I would imagine killing myself, I would often think of my parents and their sacrifices. I would think of my sister, who I love more than anyone else, and my friends who acted as a pillar of support, and I would hate myself. As I got older, I had found depression to be a cruel friend, constantly shifting shapes and sizes. Some days I would feel as small as ants crawling around my kitchen table. The next, it would be the size of city buildings hanging over my head, just to remind me of how small I am. As my teenage years passed me by, my brain transformed into a TV that I could not turn off. There were limited numbers of channels on repeat. Channel 1, my mother and father are holding me close, cradling me in their arms as if I was still a child. My head, it begins to throb. Burn, I am burning, please. Why is no one holding my hand? It hurts to see the love I yearn for but have not received. I switch the channel. Channel 2, it's dark. I am alone, I am beginning to remember all of the things I have done, I have failed to do. Ghosts of my past continuing to haunt me, old faces to taunt me, I must be broken, I must be bruised, I must be bad. I can't seem to move. Someone make it stop. Please, please make it stop. I finally remember I do not want to die. Channel 3, I do not feel a thing. Numbness continues to surround me. Who is that? Is this me? These are my memories, but it does not feel like me. I want to go home. I'm crying. Someone please just take me home. My life began to feel like I was on autopilot. The life I was living was nowhere near sustainable, but it was the only thing I knew. In order to maintain the picture-perfect facade I had thought I mastered, I continued to rationalize my self-destructive behavior if it meant I was not burning those around me. I had worked myself to the bone like this until December 2017. Within 3 weeks, I had attempted to commit suicide 3 different times, crashing my car, self-harming, and overdosing. At the start of the new year, I knew something had to change. This is when I ultimately decided to seek help and open up to my sister about what I had been going through. From here, she had helped challenge the internalized beliefs I had held about mental health and helped me find a therapist nearby. My therapist has helped me get my life back on track in both micro and macro levels. For example, my therapist has helped teach me how to focus on my breathing, use my 5 senses to connect to reality, and count colors to help keep me grounded. She also helped me reveal the poetry beneath my wounds and understand all of the trauma that has led me here today. Although I still suffer from mental illnesses, I do not mind staining my hands red if it means the future will have less blood to clean up. But that doesn't negate all of the work that needs to be done for change to happen. As this reality continues, we will continue to have younger generations having to parent themselves into maturity in the hopes of living another day. This is why I urge you all to help me advocate for change in dismantling the stigmas around mental health. Oregon happens to be the 2nd leading state in deaths by suicide. There needs to be major conversations within our communities to call to action to bring new, innovative, culturally relevant, and effective ways to break down the barriers and address mental health in a way that not only serves the community, but also benefits those in it. By speaking up about our feelings, by listening to one another, by being more patient, compassionate, and empathetic towards one another, we're able to create a safe space for others to come forward and do the same. At ASHA International, we understand that mental health affects us all. We understand how easy it is to feel alone in your own battles against mental health and aim to increase awareness through our storytelling. Our organization helps fight alongside you and your community. However, real change starts within our communities. It starts with you, me, it starts with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin. I now want to welcome Dave to the stage. He works for the other massive company out here, Nike. He's a VP there, and he is breaking down the leadership myth.
Hey everyone, I'm the guy whose slides you've seen a couple times for no reason during this presentation by my fellow storytellers. So usually I don't use them. So the irony here is that here I am with slides that are all out there before I started speaking. So I wanted to thank Guy Autry for having me, my fellow storytellers. I also would like to thank my friend and colleague Kathy Gomez for also introducing my wife Tori and I to Asha, and of course my wife. I have a little bit of a different take on how mental health challenges have touched our lives. And I'm taking an angle that is fairly personal to me as it relates to my job, but it's a journey nonetheless that led to some real serious self-discovery. And it all started back, now they won't work, right here. I was 6 years old. Don't worry, I won't go in chronological order, starting at 6. But I was 6 years old, and I had a Civil War playset, plastic army men. You can imagine which side I was on every single battle. These are the jokes. The Union, of course. And I decided that the Union was just getting tired of winning every battle, but they were going to inflict some mass casualties on the Confederates, including the loss of life and limb. And so I appropriated a X-Acto knife, not too far from what you see here, from my parents' desk, and decided that Robert E. Lee was going down that day. And in the process of him losing his leg while on horseback, the knife slipped off and went right into my left index finger. I was really more scared than anything. I was shocked. So I ran to the bathroom, turned on the water because my 6-year-old mind was telling me that's how you would get the bleeding to stop. Just hold it underneath the faucet. So after about 10 minutes of this, I heard some voices from downstairs. And of course, when you're a kid and you're in trouble, the answer is nothing is wrong, and I'm fine. My dad came up after about 5 minutes after that and said, "Oh my God, there's blood everywhere." And he took me to the emergency room where I got stitched up, my finger in a splint, and they said, "Oh, by the way, you cut your finger down to the bone, and I still have nerve damage in it to this day." So why am I telling you my medical history? It's because it's only natural that you would go to the doctor if you cut yourself. It's only natural that you would get your arm in a cast if you broke your arm, or that you would get antibiotics if you had bronchitis. And of course, it makes total common sense to everyone in this room. But I wasn't raised in a family where you would get help if you were struggling mentally. And most of us have been done in pretty good by the way that society has stigmatized mental health challenges. So this is what I want to talk to you about. I want to share with you how our journey has been shaped, our journey as parents and my journey as a man has been shaped by some mental health challenges that we faced as a family. Now, this is how we see leaders. Maybe not quite as dashing, but we see leaders as folks who have it all together. And what do we talk when we talk about leaders? We say she's really strong. She has it all together. She's got it all figured out. He's a rock. He's rock solid. He's stable. The words that we use to describe leaders have to do with having it together. And the words that we use to describe folks who may not have it all together are, she's unhinged. Or he was acting crazy in that meeting. Or he was losing his mind. Or he was going wild. And we've done a really good job as a society of tying negative mental health stigma to the words that we use and painting people who may have mental health challenges as being dangerous. So I bought into this whole thing completely. That leaders have to be strong, you have to show up, you have to make sure that nothing bothers you. You've got to be there for your team. You've got to make sure that everyone is taken care of before yourself. I bought into it completely. And this started to change about 9 years ago next week when Kyron Horman disappeared from Skyline Elementary School. He was a second grader. Our daughter was a first grader, and she sat at the same lunch table with him. One of my colleagues' daughter was his classmate. And our lives, we knew we had an anxious daughter, but we didn't know how anxious until he vanished from school, and he has never been found to this day. And our sort of sleepy community was shattered. 2 weeks after that, we're sitting there being interviewed by the FBI with a little kid. And that summer, our lives turned completely upside down. She had nightmares. She was terrified. Her separation anxiety skyrocketed. And we were absolutely petrified. We didn't know what to do. So we just got into action mode. We did everything we could. We threw every resource that we could possibly think of to help her through this. And it worked. And she stabilized. And we thought, whew, okay. We didn't know what to do, but the professionals stepped in and we're okay. It was scary, but we're okay. So I took a job and we moved halfway around the world to this beautiful setting. Isn't it beautiful? It really is. It's called Ouderkerk aan de Amstel. That means little church on the Amstel. It's about 10 minutes south of Amsterdam. Tori had always wanted to live overseas. I had had a chance to live overseas when I was a kid. We thought it would be a great opportunity, big job. I'm a leader. I'm going to step in there. I'm going to get it done. They said, hey, by the way, welcome. We're going to reorganize the entire geography, and you have to lead the reorganization for a function. So no pressure. Just moved a family. We have a son by this time with 2 littles and a wife halfway around the world, and we're going to blow up the entire work function that we were doing. But also, we weren't okay. And our daughter had a really difficult time. And then it all started all over again, and it was worse than ever. The terror and the anxiety kicked back in, and then new phobias that we didn't even know about kicked in. She couldn't attend school regularly. She couldn't leave the house most of the time. And I never, ever let anybody at work know, because I had to show up. So our home life was in total turmoil. And at work, we were reorganizing and I had to show up. Finally, it got to a point where I had to share a little bit with some of the leaders in the company that we might need to come home. But we soldiered through it. That's what you do. You soldier through it. And we moved back home from this beautiful setting. But first, I had lost 25 pounds in 4 months. It wasn't because I was riding my bike through the Netherlands. I wish I could say it was because it was fit. It was because I was stressed, anxious. Sometimes I would self-medicate. I was a physical wreck. I came back and the chiropractor said, have you been in a motorcycle accident? Because if you did, I'd believe you. Your back is the worst I've ever seen. I could barely walk. And it didn't get better for our kids and my wife either. We still struggled with mental health challenges in our home. So we were on and off with this, but still I soldiered through it. Until about 4 years ago, I realized, here we go. This is really the worst, isn't it? I don't need it. So about 4 years ago, I was standing in front of the Berlin Wall. I was on a work trip. And I was going through some things, and our daughter was off and on, in and out of schools. Sometimes she could make it, sometimes she wouldn't. And every time I'd get a phone call from home, my blood would run cold. And in the meantime, I was showing up so-so, because we had a chronic mental health challenge in our home. And we had fits and starts with therapists. And so I was standing in front of the Berlin Wall, and there was some graffiti on it that said, right now someone is dreaming of living your life. I have it tattooed on my forearm. And I took a step back and it really hit me hard. And I realized that we were so blessed because we had a great kid and a great son. We had 2 wonderful children, and that we were going to get through it, and that we had the resources to help her, and we had the resources to help ourselves. And after attending support groups, we were introduced to a bunch of families that didn't have the ability to help their kids, single parents, kids who were violent. And so I started to share what was going on, and I started to realize that I had it all wrong. That being a leader was not about having it all figured out, and also being a parent was not about having all of the solutions. I was crushing my kids under the weight of my expectations, and I was fooling myself because I wasn't being honest about my own stress and my own anxieties. So I started to share. And so one of these slides says this, but you don't need it. And one of those slides said that you have to meet people where they are, starting with yourself. There's one more. You got to meet people where they are, starting with yourself. What we learned as parents was that our daughter knew every single thing that was going on. We found a great group, happens to be a sponsor of tonight's event, where we go for family therapy. And I had to learn that my expectations for her were my expectations, that she knew everything she was going through and the damage that it was doing to us emotionally was all not her fault. So I had to start with myself. And this has helped me at work be a better leader, to help meet folks where they are and walk with them to the destination as opposed to expect them to be where they should be. I had to learn how to listen better instead of waiting to say the next thing that came up. To observe. We had a team member who was clearly having some health problems and was being judged for it. And we stepped in and we helped her through it. And I had to share. Since opening up about what our journey has been as a family, there's been at least a dozen of my colleagues who have said, because you've shared this, we need help. We don't know what to do. We don't know where to turn. And they have been able to see themselves and their families through this. And then finally, trying to build an atmosphere of empathy for ourselves. We talk openly about rest and recovery in our company. We're working at it. But we also, in our group, talk openly about if you need a mental health day, just take it. If you feel like you're overwhelmed, that's okay. We've all been there. And so what I want to leave you with is, it gets better. If you're a parent of a child who has suffered through or is suffering through mental health problems, it's not your fault. We had to learn that the hard way. We shed an ocean of tears over it. And if you're a young person who's going through it, I have the same words for you. It is not your fault. You're going to get through it. There are people who will help you. And together in events like this are going to help us along that journey. Thank you.
The clicker, our favorite person. Thank you, Dave. Lastly, we want to go to Diane, who not only has a voice as someone who is a psychiatrist, but also who has a voice of someone who has battled her own mental illness. Let's welcome Diane.
I am here to give voice to the children, teenagers, and adults who have died by suicide or right now are attempting suicide even as I speak. I am here to break the silence and end stigma by sharing my story. I am here because hope is real and change is possible. Empathic relationship is the healing matrix, and time spent on this, like our time together now, is never wasted. I'm here on behalf of all those who have suffered in shame because they were taught that perfection in someone else's eyes is what matters most, and to be yourself is a crime worthy of death. My mother first named me Sarah, but she felt Sarah sounded too much like the Yiddish word surus, or grief, and because I was sick and remained in the hospital after my birth, I instead became Diane, named after her only childhood doll. Days later, the hospital nurse cried out to my father, "Get that baby out of here. Take her home." She feared my life was at risk in the hospital due to neglect. My father took me home. My mother had stopped visiting me as she thought I would die. I have often fantasized that this nurse was my fairy godmother. I was sexually assaulted, sodomized as a young child by some older children who lived down the block. My father was a bully at home and in our neighborhood. My much older sister and brother were both valedictorian of their high school classes. This, unfortunately for me, led to my feeling insecure, inadequate, and jealous. I wanted to be them, not me. I found the love letter my father had written to his mistress when I was a teenager. When I graduated high school, a well-intentioned teacher wished me well, but then called me by my sister's name. I appeared to be outwardly normal and a success, despite experiencing anxiety, depression, and episodes of what I later learned was hypomania. I attempted suicide in medical school. Looking back, I was probably having a bipolar II mixed episode. Alone in my dorm room, I took an overdose of aminophylline, which is an asthma medication. I knew it could kill me, and that's what I wanted. I had boyfriend problems, but I was also living a lie, trying to be someone else so I could be loved. But instead of dying, I started to vomit blood and ended up in the emergency room, NG tube, charcoal, medically admitted psychiatric consult. The psychiatrist asked if I wanted to be in the psych unit. Shocked back into, I am a medical student, this can't be happening to me, I said no. How could I ever be a psychiatrist if anyone ever knew I tried to kill myself? And even worse than that, was admitted to a psychiatric hospital. My no was meant as a shield, but it made me even more isolated, my emotional turmoil a secret, with no one present to listen. Did you know that the suicide rate in doctors is the highest of any profession? That one doctor every day ends their life by suicide? And that the suicide rate of doctors is more than twice the general population? Even within the medical community, there is stigma against mental illness. 20 years later, my father asked for my forgiveness. He said, when I was hospitalized, he spoke these words to me. The next time you want to kill yourself, Diane, tell me, and I will tell you the right way to do it. I have no memory of his telling me this, but I do recall his dangling the check high above my head while driving me to doctor's appointments, so I would have to reach up and grab it. My father's cruel way of repeatedly humiliating me for receiving mental health treatment after the hospital discharge. My mother used to tell me, "Your father does not know how to love." Did he believe we were created to be the cure he could not find in himself? Was that the source of his need to have total control? The perfection in his eyes only? The my way or the highway? The silent treatment? My watching him beat my brother with a hairbrush for repeatedly dropping it, not knowing my brother had epilepsy? His demanding we all become doctors when he could not meet that dream in his own life? Are we meant to remain frozen victims within another story? Renowned psychoanalyst and psychiatrist Carl Gustav Jung has said, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of their parents." My father was a product of his time. His addiction to dexedrine and amphetamine began at my birth. Strangely, I was part of the reason why. With my being so sick at birth, my mother became depressed and the doctor gave her dexedrine. She did not like it. My father tried it and liked it. He was self-medicating his depression. My being a sensitive child opened my heart to the pain in others. Having been silenced during my growing up, I was inspired to claim my own voice, to release and express it, and to help others set themselves free creatively. I was on a life journey to become an arts and healing psychiatrist, but I did not yet know this. What can sustain and nourish us as we travel life's journey? I have learned that taking care of myself is not being selfish. For if my well-being has not been filled, I have but little to offer myself and others. Therapy, medication, friendship, sharing life's laughter, joy, and tears with others, knowing, really knowing, that asking for help is strength, not weakness. Offering help is compassion and not a power trip. To be emotionally well is knowing I was born to live and that I have a purpose, even when no one tells me, not my family, my friends, my society, and even when I've turned my own self against myself. This I know to be true. There is a self greater than myself who wants me to live, and even more importantly, knows I can live even more strongly, more bravely, and more amazingly than I have ever done before. To rekindle and restore the wellness of our inner self is a lifelong process of restoring ourselves. Many people have suffered the darkness of depression and emerged whole and into the light. Rebirth from ashes is the phoenix bird flying. May we all be empowered to break the silence and end stigma by sharing our mental health stories with our heads held high. For in the timeless words of Rabbi Hillel, "If I am not for myself, who will be? But if I am only for myself, who am I? And if not now, when?" The greatest gift of all is to be seen and heard. Thank you.
Incredible stories. Can we get one more round of applause for all of tonight's storytellers? There is so much power in what these storytellers are doing, and I hope it's now clear to you how important it is that we talk about mental health. The first step in ending the stigma is talking about it and being a place people feel comfortable talking about it as well. And it's necessary because the reality is kids, teens, and adults are struggling. I want to go through a few statistics for you. I don't normally like to rattle off numbers, but I feel like these are really important. According to NAMI, 46 million adults experience mental illness in any given year here in America. And for many, treatment is far overdue. NAMI says on average, 8 to 10 years pass between when a child starts to have their first signs of mental illness between they actually get help. That means that kid is struggling for a decade, not quite knowing what to do. And if we wait too long to help them, there is definitely a danger. According to 2015 statistics from the Oregon Health Authority, Oregon's suicide rate has been higher than the national average for 3 decades, 30 years. And to localize it even more, OHA surveyed 8th graders back in 2017, asking them if they'd contemplated suicide in the past year. And I looked at the statistics for Washington County. 14% of those 8th graders said they had contemplated suicide in the past 12 months. 14% of 13 to 14-year-olds thought about ending it all just over a decade into their lives. And that's why we would love for you to join our community, to join our movement. Here at ASHA, we are passionately trying to change these numbers, to shatter the stigma and normalize the conversations around mental health. We want to provide hope, so absolutely no one is waiting a decade for help. I'd like to ask all 10 storytellers to come crowd onto this stage. I know they're kind of dispersed all throughout, but if they want to come on down. And while they're doing that, you guys should all have a note card and a pen at your seat. If you don't, raise your hand. We have people who will run and give you one. You guys can kind of crowd on in the center. We would love your feedback on tonight's event, so please fill out those note cards if you can. Let us know what you thought about the event, and then let us know if you want to help and what you think we can do, especially if you feel empowered by all of these stories and you want to become a storyteller. Please let us know. There is actually a resource table out in the lobby where you can stop and we'll get you a gift there. That's also where you'll be able to drop off that note card full of your information. So take some time, fill it out. It really means a lot to us. And before you head out, also I want to let you know there is a fun photo op. I know a lot of the storytellers were using it earlier, but we have an ASHA backdrop. Please take a picture in front of it and share it with all the people you know who weren't able to come today. Share your story, your superpower. I know we've all been inspired by these incredibly transformational, empowering, and true stories. So thank you for sharing it. One more round of applause for them. And lastly, I would like to welcome Gayatri up to the stage. She is the reason for it all. ASHA was inspired by Gayatri's own mental health illness. And if you can, we please ask you to help in our mission and give your gift of hope. You can donate online. We have a website here. You can also find some more resources outside. So we invite you to please join our community and give us a little bit of support if you can.
Thank you so much. Thank you.